credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to be repaid in full. But love your enemies, do what is good, and lend, expecting nothing in return. Then your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High. For he is gracious to the ungrateful and evil, but merciful just as your Father, or be merciful just as your Father also is merciful. And I will read one other passage to you. This is found in Romans chapter 12. Paul writes this, and he said, if possible on your part, live at peace with everyone. Friends, do not avenge yourselves. Instead, leave room for his wrath. For it is written, vengeance belongs to me. I will repay, says the Lord. But if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. For in so doing, you will be heaping fiery coals on his head. And don't be conquered by evil, but conquer evil with good. And when you read this, you realize that in every step of the way, this is going to be David's his way. Every step of the way, if you really think about it, David has been pursued by Saul to kill him, and every step of the way, David has just eluded him everywhere. And the two options and two opportunities that he had to kill him, he didn't take it. And I want to read this to you because I thought this was interesting. I saw this on commentary, and then we'll begin the passage. But it said this, and this is very interesting. He says, remember, even though David had been anointed king years earlier, he was not exalted in a royal robe. Instead, he was exiled into the wilderness and clothed with shame. Even though David had defeated the Philistine giant and led the armies of Israel to victory time and time again, he was no longer celebrated as a hero. Instead, time and time again, he was sought as the hunted. The man who once fought the enemies of Israel was now labeled the enemy of Israel. His comrade in arms now took up arms against him. He was given the king's daughter for a wife, only to be driven from his home, only to have his wife given to another man in marriage. Instead of meeting the Philistine king as a royal equal, he had to seek asylum from his enemy, pretending to be a raving madman. No kingly bed, only dirt and rocks on which to lay his head. No royal court, only a band of outcasts and misfits. No royal procession, only hiding in caves. Condemned unjustly, betrayed consistently, suffering incessantly, and all of it with no end in sight. Can you imagine? And who was to blame? Only one man, Saul. And so David's life was misery, and he was always looking over his shoulder. He was always wondering when the next opportunity would be there for him to die, and he always stayed one step ahead, and his life was misery. But then 1 Samuel chapter 31 comes, and we see that great battle ending. So I want you to look at that for just a moment. I just want to point out a couple of verses to you. We'll look back at chapter 31, starting with verse 5. It says this, "Now when the armor bearer saw," or I tell you what, look back at verse 4. "Then Saul said to his armor bearer, 'Draw your sword and run me through with it, or these uncircumcised men will come and run me through and torture me.' But his armor bearer would not do it because he was terrified. And then Saul took his sword and fell on it. And when his armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell on his own sword and died with him. So on that day, Saul died together with his 3 sons, his armor bearer, and all his men." So this is the inglorious ending of Saul. David doesn't know any of this. Remember, David has gone back to a Philistine camp in a little town called Ziklag, where he's there with his group of merry men, his 600 group of merry men and his wives. He's come back, and his town has been burned, and his family's been taken away, but they've gone and got those back, and they've brought back to Ziklag, but he has no idea what's going on. So you have to think that as David is back in Ziklag, he's got to wonder what's going on back on the battlefield. His heart's still with Israel. His heart's still with his good friend, best friend, Jonathan, and he still loves the nation and the people. And he's got to believe, you have to believe that he's still thinking, what is going on? I wish I could get word. I wish I could get word. He has no webcams to tell him what's going on. He has no video feeds or YouTube videos to take him live into the action. He has no idea what's going on. And David, for 2 days, is sitting there wondering, I just want to know what's happening. So let's look at 2 Samuel chapter 1 and begin to kind of walk through this. And I want you to remember that of all these times where David could have gloated, he chose to do as Christ tells us to do. Chapter 1, start with verse 1 of 2 Samuel. Now, after the death of Saul, David returned from defeating the Amalekites. Now, remember that name, the Amalekites, and stayed at Ziklag 2 days. Now, again, let's kind of go back this, and you kind of wonder what David's thinking here. It's 2 days of quiet. It's 2 days of silence. He's there back, and they're just kind of sitting there. There's no word of the battle between Israel and the Philistines. And you have to imagine David's just longing to hear what's going on. Maybe nobody else wants to know, but David does. He just wants to know what goes on. But then we move from verse 1 into verse 2, and everything starts moving fast. It's really crazy how things can change so quickly in our life, isn't it? How it can go from everything's peaceful to everything's chaotic at a moment's notice. Of how just a word brought to our attention can change everything in our life. It can bring us from just our heartbeat is just steady and normal to racing. It can make us go from, man, we're just enjoying the day and the beauty of it to worrying out of our mind. It just is amazing how quickly things can change and an event can happen and how word can travel so fast where things move from quiet to chaotic in just a moment. Well, this is about to happen with David. Everything is quiet, and then all of a sudden, some guy comes up on the scene. He's dirty, he's sweating, he's a mess, and he's got news of what's happening at the front. Look at verse 2. We'll read through, actually, verse 10. It says this, Now on the third day, a man with torn clothes and dust on his head came from Saul's camp. And when he came to David, he fell to the ground and paid homage. He's doing all the right things. And David asked him, Where have you come from? And he replied to him, I've escaped from the Israelite camp. What was the outcome? Tell me, David asked him. So finally he's getting news. This guy, he's covered in dust. He's covered in dirt. He's been running to the front. He's basically said, I've been living with the Israelites, but I was one of the ones that escaped from there. And if you kind of... we'll come back to this later. And so he's come to him with news, and David is on pins and needles. He says, tell me what's the outcome, what's been going on. And this is what the guy says. He said, the troops fled from the battle. Many of the troops have fallen and are dead. And here we go. And also Saul and his son Jonathan are dead. At this point, you can imagine, well, let me just ask you this. If you're David, what immediately happens? What do you feel? Huh? Sadness. What else? Relief. Okay. Tell me why you would feel relief. Interesting. I would tend to think that as well. For my sake, all of a sudden, well, finally, I've got. Oh, my goodness, thank you, Lord, you've taken care of this, and I don't have to run anymore. Everything's good. So, sadness, relief, what else? Grief, absolutely. Grief comes. You imagine there's just a knife has been stuck into his heart. He's found that his good friend who has remained loyal. Do what? For Jonathan, he is just his heartbreak for his brother, the one he has loved and who have developed such an incredible covenant relationship together, has fallen on the battlefield. Anything else come into your mind? Well, it's interesting, his response here. So up to this point, this guy, this messenger has told him exactly what's going on. Just the facts, ma'am. And he's given him just the facts. Look what he tells him. He has torn clothes and dust on his head. As a matter of fact, that's probably from all the running and trying to get there. But it's also a traditional sign of mourning. He's got that dust on his head. He's mourning because of what's going on. So he's identifying. David immediately connects. This guy's identifying with what's going on there. He tells him, I've come from the camp. I've gotten firsthand knowledge. I've seen it with my own eyes. And then he falls to the ground and pays homage before David. He recognizes who David is. And when David says, what's going on, he tells him exactly the news. He tells him all that he knows. He says, the troops have fallen. In other words, they are running, they're retreating. Many of them have. Many of them have died on the battlefield. And now Saul and Jonathan are dead. So just the facts. And you kind of think at this point, if that's all he would have said, that would have been enough. That would have been enough. But it's amazing what happens when you're controlled by sin. You're controlled by a desire to take advantage of a situation. You're looking to see what you can get out of a tragedy. Isn't it amazing? I'll never forget this. And this happens every time there's a natural disaster. But you remember when things happened to Katrina and a lot of different of these disasters, a lot of times, what did people have to do? They had to protect whatever they had left, because what were people doing? They were looting. They were coming in and they were taking advantage of, oh man, these people have gone through it. They've lost most everything. They're not here. I'm going to see what I can get. And you kind of go, man, that's got to be the worst of the worst kind of people who take advantage of the hurt and the pain of others. But there are plenty of people around. I've just heard just recently, and what happened with this this lady who's there, that's in the news right now. Fox News talking about her last name's Guthrie. That's been missing, and they can't seem to find her. And these people have gotten all these. This family has gotten all these responses from people who are not saying, well, there's many that are expressing sympathy, but there's some who are trying to take advantage, saying, I'm the kidnapper, put this much money in this particular account. And they found, man, these people are preying on people who are going through hurt. And you think, how could somebody do this? And yet people do. They look for the opportunity. They look for, how can I get something out of this for me based on this? And how do you do it? You express this sympathy. You express all this honor and homage, thinking at any moment my pocketbook's going to be padded in some way. Well, if he'd have stayed that way and stayed quiet, it'd have been okay. But look at what happens. David says, he asked him where he's come from. But look at verse 5. So David asked the young man who brought him the report, how do you know Saul and his son Jonathan are dead? Now, it's a very good question. Why do you think David is asking him that? Why do you think David's asking him, pressing him for some details? He's what now? Maybe he's trying to get, maybe he hadn't read it right. Maybe he just got third hand, somebody told him this happened. He wants to know, he wants to see if this guy's really is understanding what's going on. Why else would David ask him, do you think? Why do you think? Yeah, it's always good when you have someone who saw it firsthand. What's that? Yeah, firsthand knowledge. I saw it with my own eyes. I was hiding over here. I saw it from a distance, but I know it was Saul. There's no doubt. I know that figure. He's bigger than everybody else. He was fighting to the end, and I saw him die. And so, again, David is asking for a little bit of extra details here. And if he would have come out and said, I know this is painful to see, but I saw him having conversation with his armor bearer there. And next thing I knew, I saw Saul take his sword and kill himself. It was brutal, David. I'm sorry to tell you that, but that's how it ended. But instead, he has a different story. Look what happens. It says this. David asked him that, and look at what happens. He says, well, I happened to be on Mount Gilboa, and there was Saul leaning on his spear. And at that very moment, the chariots and the cavalry were closing in on him. And when he turned around and saw me, he called out to me. So I answered, I'm at your service. And he asked me, who are you? And I told him, I'm an Amalekite. And then he begged me, stand over me and kill me, for I'm mortally wounded and my life still lingers. So I stood over him and killed him, because I knew that after he had fallen, he couldn't survive David. I took the crown that was on his head and the armband that was on his arm, and I've brought them here to you, Lord. And I can imagine he just reaches out and hands it to him. Who's telling the truth? What is the truth? What actually happened on that mountain? It's a different story, isn't it? It's a whole different story. So, it's a little bit of more embellishment there. A little embellishment there. A little, you know what? Well, let me just ask you this. Why would this guy tell this particular story? Aha. A little something in it for me. A little something in it for me. So if you start reading through the lines a little bit, you start thinking, okay, well, what's happened here? Because he does have knowledge of the death of Saul. As a matter of fact, he probably came up on Saul because he does have the crown and he does have the armband, the ringlet that signifies that this is, I mean, he couldn't have got it anywhere else. So it does seem that he found the crown, he found the ringlet, and he made his way and he found David. So what is his motivation? To find favor with David, and what else? Why else would he have come? You would think you would want a reward of some kind. So if you kind of start reading between the lines, this is a guy that after the battle is all done, starts making his way through there to do a little looting. He's looking for a few little treasures to pick up. And oh my goodness, lo and behold, there's Saul. And how does he know it's Saul? Well, because of the crown and the ringlet, and also because you can't help but know it's Saul because of his size. And so he gets it and he thinks, what can I do? I know. I'll take you to David. And what does he know about David? That he's the next what? He's the next king. And so he can go in and get down on his face, pay homage to David, and just say, oh, king, long live the king. You're the rightful king. And by the way, I found this, and I killed him. Why would he admit to killing him? Why do you think he would admit to killing him? Yes, absolutely. Well, he'll be happy to hear. And he'll go, my goodness, my Amalekite friend, man, I'm going to put you at the top of my cabinet because I'm about to be a king because you've done this great act for me. And so he's probably got all these dreams about, man, he's going to be at the top of the cabinet, and man, he's going to have treasure and position and power. Oh man, this is going to be good. There are two things wrong with this. Well, probably a lot more than two things. But what do you see that's wrong with this whole idea of thinking? Well, that he was lying was first and foremost. He had no idea of David's heart. And what had David refused to do over and over and over? Kill the king. And he's talking to a guy who has refused to kill the king every step of the way. And matter of fact, had two key right down, Saul right there. He could have taken him out. And here's this guy comes up. I just killed him. He begged me, king. He begged me, David. He begged me. He told me, and I did it for you. I did it for you. There's another part of this that's not too good either. Who did David just end up fighting who stole his wives and burned the town down? The Amalekites. Can you imagine? Here's this guy, well, I'm Amalekite. You know, if you go back in Scripture, we won't go back into all these different pages here, but I went back and I did a little study on this, and I went, okay, this is interesting. You go back to Genesis chapter 36, verse 12. This is how far it goes back, and I'll read this to you. Genesis chapter 36. Let's see. Well, this is actually when it starts, the whole line. Do you know where the line of the Amalekites came from? They came from Esau. You know, Jacob and Esau came from, and that's where all of a sudden it begins to be some enmity between Israel and those who are against that. So that's where it begins. In Exodus, when Moses is going out, I mean, you've got the Amalekites fighting and killing some of the Israelites. You go into Deuteronomy and even into Judges, the Amalekites are always the ones they're fighting. As a matter of fact, if you go into this, they give in 1 Samuel 15 the very first battle, the main battle that God says, I want you to wipe everybody out. Who is He telling them to wipe out? The Amalekites. They're evil. They have lived a life of destruction and violence and anti-God behavior. And God says, I'm done with them. Wipe them out. And Saul, does he do it? No. Do you remember what he does? He keeps the best of the best. And he keeps the king alive. As a matter of fact, if you even go further in this, in the book of Esther, do you remember the guy that wears the black hat in the book of Esther? Who is it? Do you remember? Haman. Haman wants to take out every single Jewish people in Persia. Esther comes to the rescue for such a time as this. Haman is an Agagite, a relative of the Amalekites. And so every step of the way we see, this is why we want to get this. And this guy comes up and proudly says, I'm Amalekite. I'm Amalekite. As if that's going to be a really good thing for him to hear. And so every step of the way, this guy, man, he thought he had it all. But look at what David's response is. This is interesting because David doesn't do anything right away to this guy. But look at verse 11. Look at the response. And then David took hold of his clothes and he tore them. And all the men with him did the same. And they mourned and wept and fasted until the evening for those who died by the sword, for Saul, his son Jonathan, the Lord's people, and the house of Israel. What do you make of David's response to this? What do you make of a response of a guy that's been hunted all his life by these very men? What do you make of the response of a guy whose life has been made miserable, who Saul has tried to pin him to the wall with a spear, has sent thousands after David constantly? What do you make of a guy who responds in this way? No doubt. No doubt. Yeah, no doubt. What else do you think this says about David? What does this reveal about David? And no doubt. It reveals the heart. I know. You know, it's I sometimes read things like this, and I'm reminded of how quickly I respond in an opposite way than I really think that Christ desires us to respond. You know, David's response oftentimes is when he's in his right frame, when he's thinking, when he's walking with Christ, when he's walking with God, and he's a man after God's own heart, how he responds in a way we go, oh, shoot, that's exactly how I should have responded. You know, we think, I see now. Because when he could have taken advantage of the one who's trying to take him out, he chooses a different way. When he had every opportunity to fast forward God's plan for him rather than to wait on God, he waits. And I think, man, every step when when he had every opportunity to be proud because the women were lining the streets singing his praises, when he could have got proud and said, "Oh, look at me, big man on campus," he chose to stay that humble shepherd's heart. And I think, man, could I have handled anything like that? Could I have responded in just that way? You know, I consider Saul, the ultimate authority figure in Israel at that time, and he was the king. He's the ultimate authority, and when we think about the authorities in our life now, we certainly think of our men in uniform, the police and the sheriff's department, and all these particular people that are in those positions. But then it begins to go even further. It goes up to the governor's office or the mayor, and then the governor, and certainly the president. And when the president is doing those things that we like, he's easy to follow. But when all of a sudden we get someone in position of power that we don't like too well and is not doing those things, it's harder for us, isn't it? It's harder for us to not only obey, but to even pray for. And yet when Paul wrote in Romans chapter 13, he talked about the importance of us as people to not only obey those, and obviously if it comes to where they're doing something that's against what God desires, we have no choice. We must follow God. We don't have a choice there. If this government is telling us to do something that's opposite of God, God is our ultimate authority. But God has put these people in position. He's the one that's raised these up for a particular purpose. And so David here, instead of rebelling against the authority, he chose to honor and respect the authority that was there before him. And so he continued to follow after God's leadership in his life rather than maybe what we would consider his own desires there. And yet in every step, David's desire was God's desire, right? And so he's mourning here. He's weeping. He's fasting for all these. He's fasting for Saul. He's mourning for Saul. Why would he mourn for Saul? Why do you think he would mourn for this king here? Simply because he was God's anointed. Simply because he was God's anointed. God had put him in place, and he mourned for him. He mourned for him because he was, yes, God's anointed. He was the king over this nation that he loved. He was the authority figure. And so the defeat of Saul meant the defeat of a nation. It meant the defeat of God's set-apart people. And so he mourned for him because it was not as it should have been. He mourned for his son Jonathan. We know why he mourned for Jonathan. That was his great friend. He mourned for the Lord's people and the whole house of Israel. And so David was just broken for all this. Never once does he go, man, now is the time I can be king. I can finally be king. Every step of the way it was just mourning for what had happened. Mm-hmm. It's such a tragedy, such a tragic end to it all. And he sees, because David, of all people, knows where why had been set apart in the first place. He knows the history. He knows why God's chosen people had been set apart for a particular purpose in this world to glorify the God of the universe. And when David sees it, he sees this as a yes for the people of Israel, but he also sees it as the way that the world can gloat over the great God that he serves. And so now he sees this is the name of the great God of the universe. This is the God I love is now connected with these people who have not been defeated. And so he wants the name of God to always be made great. And so he's seeing this happen. And so after he mourns for a while, he comes back to that Amalekite. You would think that while he's mourning, the Amalekite would have said, I think I might have said a little bit too much. I need to slink away. I'm just going just got to move out of the scene and make his way back. But he decides to stick around. He thinks, well, after the tears dry up, I'm gonna get something from this. And so David comes back to him. And look at verse 13. And David inquired of the young man who had brought him the report, where are you from? And he says, well, I'm the son of a foreigner. He said, I'm an Amalekite. I don't know why you thought that was a good thing to say. I don't know. And so David questioned him, And this is where it comes. Look at this. How is it that you are not afraid to lift your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed? Who was it? Besides, I don't think David was ever afraid to do that. David understood the anointing and said, I'm not going to touch this guy. But who was afraid to touch the Lord's anointed in the last chapter? His own armor bearer, remember? His own armor bearer, because Saul said, armor bearer, kill me. And it said that he was greatly afraid, and he would not touch. The armor bearer would not dare touch Saul. And when Saul kills himself, that's when his armor bearer takes his own life. But even his armor bearer would not. And David's saying, why were you not afraid to lift your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed? And then David summoned one of his servants and said, come here, kill him. And the servant struck him and he died. For David had said to the Amalekite, your blood is on your own head, because your own mouth testified against you by saying, I killed the Lord's anointed. What does this say about David? What does this say about David here? He is a stickler for rules, and he's a stickler for God's command, isn't he? If God said it, it is in cement. It is a foundational thing. Yeah. You kind of think, don't you? Yeah, that's right. It's interesting because it may have been a discernment from the Lord. The Lord may have come to him and said he's lying. He may have come. But even if David does not go far enough to go, okay, are you telling the truth or you're lying? What does the guy confess to doing? He's confessed to killing him. And just his own confession was his death sentence. He knew he didn't do it. And now what do you do now? No, wait, I want to change my story. Wait, I didn't do it. I didn't do it. Too late. Too late. Your confession has signed your death warrant here. And sure enough, it did. And he said he had killed the Lord's anointed, and David said, you're out. You're out. Well, I will close with this because I think it's very important here. What is, other than David being a man after God's own heart and some of the exploits of him, what is David most known for? The writing of what? The Psalms. David was a songwriter. And at those moments of stress, David would write a song. And those moments of darkness, of the moments of where he just felt incredibly joyful, of those moments of where God just pulled back the curtain of the universe and allowed him to look in there and see God, he would write songs, and he would write psalms. And I would love to know the tunes of some of these, but he decides to write. And it says here in verse 17, David sang the following lament for Saul and his son Jonathan, and he ordered that the Judahites be taught the song of the bow. It's a song of sadness in a lot of ways. And it's written in the book of Jashar. Now, the book of Jashar is not a missing book of the Bible. It's not anything like that. As a matter of fact, you would see, I think I think I wrote this down somewhere. I think back in the Judges or back in Joshua, I wrote it somewhere where they quote from that. But it was a book of history, a book of songs, psalms, and poetry, and so they would draw sometimes from that. It was well known. It's been long lost. But it was written. And he wanted people to remember. It's interesting. He said, why would he write? He said, I want it written down. Why does he want it written down? He wants people to always remember it. He wants people to never to forget. I don't want anybody to forget. And you would think this is his opportunity to write, I want you to know about the hard times I went through with Saul. I want you to remember some of the difficulties that Saul put the nation through and why it came to this. I want you to remember the history of this moment. But instead, David just writes glowing because he wants them to remember the good. It says a lot about David, doesn't it? It's not that he wants them to ignore. Most of these people, they have been through it. They know it. But David chooses his song is going to bring about the good. I want you to remember the good. I want you to remember, when you remember Saul and you remember Jonathan, I just want you to remember the good. There was plenty to remember that was bad, and yet what David wanted them to memorize was only the good. It says so much about who David was. Again, over and over, we see David responding in such a Christ-like way. He is a type of Christ. Every response he has, everything he does is all a Christ-like response to the way that we are to respond. And so instead of looking back on an enemy of his life in kind of a way to say, okay, now I'm going to get him good for all this, he chooses to remember the good. So let's look at it very quickly, and we'll close out with it. Verse 19, he said, the splendor of Israel lies slain on your heights, how the mighty have fallen. As a matter of fact, he uses that term, how the mighty have fallen, 3 specific times. The language is very poetic here. And then he says in verse 20, do not tell it in Gath. Don't announce it in the marketplaces of Ashkelon or the daughters of the Philistines. Or the daughters of the Philistines will rejoice, and the daughters of the uncircumcised will gloat. What is he saying here? He says, don't tell this to all the other people, because I want what they're feeling right now to be very short-lived. I don't want that. They're going to be happy for just a moment, but I don't want you to take this back to them so that they can go, yeah, that was us that did that. We killed him. We took him down. We took Israel down. He said, I want to take it back because that's short-lived, so don't let them take this back. I want this to be for us. This is for us. And look at verse 21. Mountains of Gilboa, let no dew or rain be on you, or fields of offering, for there the shield of the mighty was defiled, the shield of Saul no longer anointed with oil. And he's saying this, he's saying, where that battle is fought, I want even that area to always mourn about what has happened. I want them to mourn. We're going to mourn, but I want even the mountains in this area, I want all these to constantly be almost cursed by this. I want them to mourn, this mountain to mourn for what's happened. Verse 22, Jonathan's bow never retreated. Saul's sword never returned unstained from the blood of the slain, from the bodies of the mighty. Saul and Jonathan loved and delightful. You would not think they would say that about Saul, but he does. Loved and delightful. They were not parted in life or in death. They were swifter than eagles, stronger than lions. Daughters of Israel, weep for Saul, who clothed you in scarlet with luxurious things, who decked your garments with gold ornaments. And you know what he's saying there? He's saying, all you ladies who sang his praises and got some of the spoils of the wars that he won, I want you to weep as much now, because in those times of good, he gave you so many good things. Don't forget that. Don't forget what he did for you, and just weep for him for that loss. And again, verse 25, how the mighty have fallen in the thick of battle. And then at this moment, he turns his heart towards his good friend David. And look at how he closes here. He said, Jonathan lies slain on your heights. I grieve for you, Jonathan, my brother. You are such a friend to me. Your love for me was more wonderful than the love of a woman, and how the mighty have fallen and the weapons of war have perished. He's not saying this in the sense of any kind of disgraceful kind of way. He's saying that this relationship I had, this covenant, loving brotherhood I had with my good friend was better, the greatest relationship I could ever have, because it was steadfast, it was loyal, it was solid, it would never be broken except through this. And he said, you have been the friend to me that I will never have again. I will never have again. This was a covenant. And he said, how the mighty have fallen, the weapons of war have perished. David's song of the bow was such out of the heart of a man who loved God. And even in his death, Saul's death, David chooses to respond in a Christ-like way. And as I go back to what I said at the very beginning, sometimes our enemies and those who treat us unjustly and those people who treat us wrongly, are the very ones we desire vengeance or revenge, or somehow we want their life to be miserable because of the way they've treated us. And never once do we see David respond that way. As a matter of fact, whenever he says anything, he says, may God repay it. I'm not going to, but I'm just going to give that to the Lord. I'm going to let that happen. If he dies on the battlefield, if he dies natural death, that's up to God. I'm just going to continue to follow after him. And I think that's exactly the way that God desires us to respond. Even if somebody is treating us unjustly, God, I'm just giving that back to you. If they're treating me not as I should be treated, Lord, I'm going to go actually the opposite way. I'm going to do that's not expected. I'm going to love them in a way that almost astounds them. When you look at this last part, you start thinking, okay, what can we get from this? David had an ultimate respect for the authority, even when it was conflicted. David continued to respect. He continued to respect because it came from God. He always responded in integrity in his actions. Integrity, and character. His love for God, a man after God's own heart, was constantly being poured out in every opportunity he had. It was about, God, I love you, and that's what's going to outflow out of me. And then there was always this hope of redemption. Always this hope of redemption. What David knew, sometimes it was in the back of his mind, he always knew he was going to be king. He knew he was going to be king. And it was not up to him to decide the date and the time. That was going to be up to God. But there was always a hope redemption was coming. God can always bring new beginnings out of the darkest moments. And it's true of what Christ does for us, right? Most of us, I hope all of us can remember that moment that we trusted Christ and he came to us and he said, I want you to follow after me. And he turned our defeat into victory because of what he did on the cross. And David remembers this, is that hope always comes in following after Christ, and he'll bring light in the darkest moments. Okay, let's pray. Father, we are just so thankful for your love for us. Father, for how you always bring good. You always bring good. And Father, I thank you for the truth of your word. And Lord, may we always be those who respond as people who love you most. Father, thank you for your goodness and your kindness to us. For we ask this all in your name. Amen.
Thank you, Brother Jim. We sure do appreciate you. We also want to say goodbye to everybody who's been with us on YouTube, Facebook, online. God bless you. Have a great rest of your day, and we will see you on next Wednesday.